Have you ever noticed how one wrong turn can change the entire course of your life? Emma never meant to walk into the wrong hotel room that night. She certainly never intended to fall asleep in Alexander Reed's bed, the man whose empire was built on the ashes of her family's small business. The billionaire who'd never once looked her in the eye during the 3 years she'd worked as his executive assistant. But fate has a wicked sense of humor. When morning came, bringing with it his thunderous voice and her mortified realization, Emma thought it was the worst moment of her life. She couldn't have known it was just the beginning, that this accidental intimacy would unravel secrets buried for decades, force truth from shadows, and prove that the distance between penthouse and poverty was measured not in dollars, but in the courage to be vulnerable. This is their story. Emma Matthews pressed her forehead against the cool window of the resort's elevator, trying to find relief from the pounding in her skull. 3 glasses of champagne. That's all it had taken to transform Alexander Reed's usually invisible executive assistant into someone who'd actually laughed at the CFO's terrible jokes. "Pull yourself together," she whispered, watching the numbers climb. 24 floors above Vancouver's glittering skyline, her bed waited. A bed she desperately needed to collapse into before tomorrow's merger announcement. The corridors of the Elevation Resort all looked identical: cream walls, mahogany doors, and brass room numbers that now swam before her tired eyes. Emma squinted at the keycard in her hand. Was that 2418 or 2419? The carpet seemed to shift beneath her sensible heels as she trudged forward. A door stood slightly ajar at the end of the hallway. "Thank you, universe," she muttered, nudging it open with her shoulder. The darkness inside was welcoming, the silence a balm after hours of corporate small talk. Emma didn't bother with the lights. She simply kicked off her shoes, dropped her clutch on what she assumed was a table, and made her way toward the king-sized bed outlined by moonlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. The mattress felt different, more luxurious than she remembered. The sheets were cooler, silkier against her skin as she sank into them fully clothed, too exhausted to care about her wrinkled dress or smudged makeup. "Just 5 hours," she whispered to herself, pulling a pillow closer. 5 hours of peace before I have to be perfect Emma again. The pillow smelled of sandalwood and something distinctly masculine, a detail her foggy brain registered but couldn't process. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered except the sweet relief of sleep that was already pulling her under, away from spreadsheets and merger documents and the weight of being invisible in a world of powerful men. She dreamed of her childhood home that night, the small bookstore her parents had owned before Alexander Reed's development company had bought the entire block, demolished it, and built the gleaming Reed Tower. She dreamed of her father's reading glasses perched on his nose as he'd stamped price tags on new arrivals, of her mother's laugh as she'd arranged displays in the windows. In her dream, they were still alive, still telling her that books would take her anywhere she wanted to go. That she could be anyone, have anything. It was the best sleep Emma had experienced in years. She didn't feel the mattress dip in the early hours of morning when another body slid between the sheets on the opposite side. Didn't hear the soft sigh or the rustle of expensive fabric as a suit jacket was draped over a nearby chair. Didn't know that across the vast expanse of Egyptian cotton, the most ruthless CEO in the Pacific Northwest was falling into his own dreamless sleep, unaware that the woman whose family history he'd erased was breathing softly just inches away. Alexander Reed awoke to the unfamiliar sensation of not being alone. For a disorienting moment, he froze, years of disciplined routine colliding with the unexpected warmth emanating from the other side of his bed. His brain catalogued the anomalies: the faint scent of jasmine, the soft rhythm of breathing that wasn't his own, the flash of burgundy fabric against white sheets. Then his eyes snapped fully open. There was a woman in his bed. A woman with dark hair spilling across his pillowcase, face half buried in down, one hand curled like a child's against her cheek. What the hell? He pushed himself upright, voice cutting through the morning stillness. The woman stirred, a small frown crossing her face before her eyes fluttered open. For 3 suspended seconds, confusion clouded her expression. Then horror dawned in waves: recognition, disbelief, and finally mortification as she bolted upright, clutching the sheet to her chest despite being fully dressed. "Mr. Reed." Her voice was barely a whisper. Alexander's mind finally placed her. Matthews. Emma Matthews, his executive assistant of 3 years. The woman who scheduled his life with military precision, who anticipated his needs before he voiced them, who had never once been late or made a significant error. Until now. "What are you doing in my room?" she asked, scrambling backward until she nearly fell off the edge of the mattress. "My room," he corrected, his voice controlled despite the bizarre situation. "The question is, what are you doing in it?" Emma's eyes darted around the suite, recognizing the sleek minimalism of his aesthetic that was so different from her own room 6 floors below. The Wall Street Journal neatly folded on the nightstand. The 3 identical charcoal suits hanging in the open closet. The laptop positioned at a perfect right angle on the desk. "Oh my God," she breathed, pressing her palms against her flushed cheeks. "I thought the door was open, and I just assumed. I must have walked into the wrong room." Alexander watched emotions flicker across her face, seeing for perhaps the first time how expressive she was. In the office, she maintained a carefully neutral demeanor, efficient, professional, almost invisible. Now she looked painfully human, her dark eyes wide with embarrassment, her usually neat hair tumbling around her shoulders. "You didn't think to check the room number?" he asked, reaching for his watch on the nightstand. "I had a few drinks at the reception," she admitted, tugging at the wrinkled hem of her dress. "The numbers were dancing." "Dancing?" He repeated the word flatly. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Reed. This is completely unprofessional. I'll leave immediately." She stood, searching frantically for her shoes, her movements jerky with panic. Alexander found himself strangely reluctant to watch her flee. In the gentle morning light, without her usual armor of perfect grooming and professional distance, Emma Matthews looked surprisingly vulnerable. There were shadows beneath her eyes he'd never noticed before, a tiredness that makeup usually concealed. A sharp knock at the door froze them both. "Mr. Reed," came a voice from the hallway. "It's Patricia Winters. I have those revised projection numbers you requested for the morning meeting." Emma's eyes widened in horror. Patricia was Reed Enterprises' head of finance and the company's most notorious gossip. "Hide," Alexander said, the command automatic. "Where?" Emma hissed, looking wildly around the open concept suite with its minimal furniture and lack of convenient hiding spots. "Bathroom. Now." Emma darted toward the ensuite just as another knock sounded. Alexander ran a hand through his hair and strode to the door, opening it with the confident ease of a man who definitely hadn't just woken up next to his assistant. "Patricia. You're early." Through the crack in the bathroom door, Emma watched as Alexander took the folder and dismissed the finance director with cool efficiency. When the hotel room door clicked shut, she emerged cautiously, barefoot and disheveled. "No one can know about this," she said quietly. Alexander studied her, noting the tension in her shoulders, the way she couldn't quite meet his eyes. Agreed. She found her shoes beneath the desk and slipped them on, retrieved her clutch from where it had fallen beside a chair. Alexander observed her methodical movements. The same precision she brought to organizing his calendar now applied to erasing all evidence of her presence in his space. At the door, she paused, still looking anywhere but at him. "This won't happen again." "I should hope not," he replied, but without the cutting edge his words usually carried. Emma nodded once and slipped out, closing the door softly behind her. Alexander stood motionless in the center of the room, feeling oddly unsettled. For 3 years, Emma Matthews had been nothing more than a competent shadow at the edges of his awareness. Now, suddenly, she was a person with messy hair and sleepy eyes and a small scar above her right eyebrow he'd somehow never noticed before. He didn't like it. Didn't like how the scent of jasmine lingered on his pillowcase or how the impression of her body remained on sheets that cost more than she probably earned in a week. Alexander Reed had built his empire by maintaining perfect distance from everyone around him. This accidental intimacy felt like a breach in carefully constructed walls, one he needed to seal immediately. "Do you know what this says?" Alexander tossed the business section of the Vancouver Sun onto Emma's desk 3 days after their hotel room incident. "It says our stock dropped 8 points after rumors surfaced about instability in Reed Enterprises' leadership." Emma glanced at the paper, maintaining the professional mask she'd perfected since returning from the resort. They'd succeeded in avoiding each other almost completely, communicating through emails and intermediaries whenever possible. "I saw it," she said, her voice deliberately neutral. "The Tanner Group has postponed signing until next week. They want additional assurances before finalizing the merger. They're getting cold feet." Alexander paced the length of her office, a sleek antechamber that separated his sanctuary from the rest of the floor. 7 months of negotiations, and suddenly they're hesitating because some junior executive posted on social media that he saw me looking cozily domestic with a woman at the resort. Emma's fingers stilled over her keyboard. "What?" "Apparently, when Patricia Winters delivered those reports to my room, she saw a woman's clutch on my desk. Combined with my disheveled appearance, she concluded I'd spent the night with someone." His jaw tightened. "She mentioned it to her assistant, who told our marketing director, who happened to be having drinks with Tanner's CFO." That's ridiculous," Emma said, heat rising to her cheeks. "People have personal lives. It shouldn't affect business decisions." "But it does. Philip Tanner is notoriously conservative. His family-owned company prides itself on traditional values and stability." Alexander stopped pacing and leaned against her desk, too close for comfort. "He doesn't want to merge with a company run by someone he perceives as having poor judgment." Emma swallowed hard. "I'm sorry. This is my fault." "It's not about fault. It's about solutions." Alexander's gaze was calculating as it swept over her. "And I think I've found one." Something in his tone made Emma's skin prickle with apprehension. "What kind of solution?" "The rumors already exist. We can't erase them." He straightened, adjusting his perfectly knotted tie. "So instead, we control the narrative." "Meaning?" "Meaning that instead of a CEO having a random hookup with an unnamed woman, creating an image of impulsivity and poor judgment, we present a different story. Alexander Reed has been quietly dating his longtime executive assistant, a relationship built on mutual respect and shared professional values." Emma stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "You want to pretend we're dating?" "For 2 weeks. Just until the Tanner merger is finalized." "That's insane," she said, pushing back from her desk. No one would believe it. Why not? We've worked closely together for 3 years. You know everything about my professional life. You're intelligent, presentable, and his eyes flickered over her in clinical assessment, conventionally attractive. It's entirely plausible. Emma felt as if the air had been sucked from the room. Do you even hear yourself? You're talking about fabricating a relationship to manipulate a business deal. I'm talking about protecting the livelihoods of 1,200 employees who depend on this company, he countered. If the Tanner merger fails, we'll have to cut at least 15% of our workforce. There must be another way. If you have a better solution, I'm listening. Emma fell silent. She'd seen the projections, knew how much Reed Enterprises had invested in preparations for this merger. The layoffs would be devastating, particularly for the administrative and support staff, people like her who couldn't easily walk into another high-paying position. How would this even work, she finally asked, hating that she was actually considering it. Simple. We're seen together at key events. Share a few meals in public. Project the image of a stable, committed relationship that would reassure Philip Tanner that I'm not an impulsive risk-taker. Emma laughed hollowly. You're asking me to lie. I'm asking you to act. For a limited time, with clear boundaries, toward a specific goal. Alexander moved toward her office door, then paused. Think of it as an extension of your professional duties. And if I refuse? His expression remained impassive. Then I'll find someone else willing to help save this company. Left alone, Emma pressed her trembling hands flat against her desk. The worst part wasn't his presumption or his coldly logical approach to something as personal as a relationship. The worst part was that some small, traitorous part of her had fluttered awake at the prospect of being publicly claimed by Alexander Reed, even as a pretense. That same part that had noticed, over 3 years, how his voice softened when he spoke to his elderly mother on the phone. How he remembered the names of janitorial staff when executives couldn't be bothered. How his eyes sometimes held a shadow of something that looked almost like loneliness when he thought no one was watching. Emma reached for the newspaper still lying on her desk. Below the headline about Reed Enterprises' stock drop was a smaller article about downtown redevelopment, a 20-year retrospective on how Alexander Reed had transformed the city skyline. There, in the grainy background of a photo showing the groundbreaking ceremony for Reed Tower, was her family's bookstore. Already marked for demolition, the sign still visible, Matthews and Daughter Fine Books. Emma's fingers traced the outline of the storefront. Her parents had died believing their legacy had been erased by a man who'd never even known their names. And now that man wanted her to pretend to love him. Don't fidget, Alexander murmured, his hand settling against the small of Emma's back as they entered the observatory. The restaurant occupied the top floor of Reed Tower, all glass walls and panoramic views of Vancouver's harbor. I'm not fidgeting, she whispered back, though she immediately stopped twisting the unfamiliar weight of the platinum bracelet around her wrist, his gift for their staged 3-month anniversary. Emma had argued against the jewelry. No one's going to believe you'd spend that kind of money on an assistant, she'd said when he'd presented the velvet box that morning. You're not my assistant tonight, he'd replied, securing the clasp with surprisingly gentle fingers. You're the woman I care about. And I never do anything halfway. Now, as the maitre d' escorted them to the best table in the restaurant where they would be perfectly visible to Philip Tanner and his wife, already seated across the room, Emma felt the weight of eyes following them. Alexander Reed rarely made public appearances that weren't business-related, and never with a woman on his arm. Everyone's staring, she said through a fixed smile as he held her chair. Let them. Alexander took the seat opposite her, his knees brushing hers beneath the small table. That's the point. For 10 days, they'd been orchestrating these accidental encounters with the Tanners, a charity auction, a symphony performance, and now dinner at the city's most exclusive restaurant. Each time, Alexander played his role to perfection, looking at Emma with just the right mixture of affection and respect. What unsettled her was how naturally it seemed to come to him, this man she believed incapable of human warmth. The gentle hand at her elbow. The private smiles. The way he leaned in when she spoke, as if her words mattered. Tell me about your day, he said now, voice pitched to carry just far enough. Emma took a sip of water, buying time. They'd established a routine for these performances, exchanging enough real information to make the conversations genuine, while carefully avoiding anything too personal. The quarterly reports came in. Asia-Pacific exceeded projections by 12%. Alexander's mouth twitched. Most men ask about their girlfriend's day and don't receive financial data. Most men aren't dating their executive assistants. Fair point. He studied her over the rim of his wineglass. Try again. Tell me something I don't know about your day. Emma hesitated. I had lunch with my friend Clara. We've known each other since university. What did you talk about? This, actually. Emma gestured vaguely between them. She saw the photo from the charity auction in the business section. Asked if the rumors were true. Alexander's expression sharpened. And what did you tell her? I lied. As instructed. Emma met his gaze steadily. I'm getting quite good at it. Something flickered across his face, discomfort, perhaps, or guilt, but it was gone too quickly to interpret. Ms. Matthews, came a jovial voice from behind her. What a pleasure to finally meet Alexander's young lady. Emma turned to find Philip Tanner standing beside their table, his wife smiling politely at his side. With his silver hair and grandfatherly demeanor, the CEO of Tanner Group looked nothing like the shrewd businessman who'd built a Canadian manufacturing empire. Mr. Tanner, she said, accepting his offered hand. The pleasure is mine. Please, call me Philip. His eyes twinkled as he looked between them. Alexander's been quite secretive about you. Now I see why he's been leaving our negotiations promptly at 6 these past few months. Alexander's hand came to rest possessively on Emma's shoulder. Some things are worth making time for. The simple touch sent warmth cascading down her spine, a reaction she immediately tried to suppress. This wasn't real. None of it was real. How did you two meet? Mrs. Tanner asked, her question directed at Emma. At work, Emma replied carefully. I've been Mr. Reed's executive assistant for 3 years. But it took me 2.5 of those years to notice what was right in front of me, Alexander added, his thumb tracing a small circle against her collarbone. Emma forced herself to breathe normally, to smile as if his touch was familiar rather than electrifying. Alexander doesn't rush into anything without thorough consideration. The mark of a good businessman, Philip nodded approvingly. And a good husband, I'd wager. Alexander's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on Emma's shoulder. Perhaps someday I'll have the opportunity to prove that theory. After the Tanners returned to their table, Emma exhaled slowly. You're very convincing, she murmured. So are you. Alexander's eyes lingered on her face. I almost believed you myself. The strangest part was that Emma wasn't entirely acting. The more time she spent with Alexander outside the office, the more she glimpsed the man beneath the CEO. The way he always held doors open, not just for her but for everyone. How he remembered the names of servers at restaurants. The genuine laugh that sometimes escaped when she said something unexpected. It was becoming dangerously easy to forget this was a business arrangement with an expiration date. "One more week," he said, as if reading her thoughts. "The final contract signing is next Friday. And then we stage our amicable breakup," Emma replied, surprised by the hollow feeling that accompanied the words. Alexander studied her for a long moment. Yes. Exactly as planned. But something in his expression made Emma wonder if their carefully controlled game was beginning to spiral beyond either of their expectations and what would be left of them when the final move was played. Emma found him in his office at 2:17 a.m., silhouetted against floor-to-ceiling windows, a tumbler of amber liquid in his hand. The skyline behind him glittered with lights that couldn't compete with the hard edges of his profile. "You're still here," she said, pausing in the doorway. Alexander didn't turn. "As are you. I saw your light." She stepped inside, placing a folder on his desk. The revised contract terms from Tanner's legal team. "Any surprises?" "Nothing significant. They've agreed to retain 98% of current employees for at least 18 months post-merger. A small victory that had been important to her, though she'd never told him why. Her father's oldest friend had lost his job when Matthew's and daughter was demolished. No warning, no severance, no consideration for his 20 years in the same building. She'd fought for that protection clause in the Tanner contract with the quiet ferocity of someone who understood the human cost of business decisions. Alexander finally turned, his tie loosened, the top button of his shirt undone. "You should go home, Emma. It's late." "So should you." He lifted the tumbler in a mock toast. "I still have work to do. It can wait until morning." "You're giving me orders now." There was no heat in the question, just weary amusement. Emma crossed the room to stand beside him at the window. From this height, the city looked like a circuit board, connections of light and movement pulsing below them. "3 nights this week," she said quietly. "You haven't left before midnight." Alexander took a slow sip of his drink. "I wasn't aware you monitored my schedule that closely." "It's my job to know where you are." "No. It's your job to keep track of my appointments. My whereabouts after hours are my own concern." Emma turned to face him fully. "Is something wrong? Beyond the merger, I mean." He studied her with an intensity that made her wish she'd kept her distance. After 2 weeks of pretending to be intimate, the lines between performance and reality had begun to blur. Small touches lingered. Glances held too long. Conversations drifted beyond the script they'd established. "My mother's cancer has returned," he said finally. "Stage 4. The prognosis isn't good." Emma felt the news like a physical blow. Eleanor Reed was the only person Alexander spoke about with genuine warmth, the only family he had left. "Alexander, I'm so sorry." Without thinking, she placed her hand on his arm, the kind of gesture she'd made a dozen times in public recently, but never alone like this. He looked down at her hand, then covered it with his own. "It's why I pushed so hard for this merger. Tanner Group's medical division has been developing experimental treatments that aren't available elsewhere." "You're doing this for her," Emma whispered, understanding dawning. "All of it, the rush to close, even our arrangement?" "Partially." His thumb brushed over her knuckles. though I'll admit this particular strategy took an unexpected turn. What do you mean? Alexander set his glass down, but didn't release her hand. I mean that pretending to care for you has become less of an act than I anticipated. Emma's breath caught. In the dim light of his office, with the city spread beneath them and no audience to perform for, his words felt dangerous, like a door opening to a room she had no business entering. Don't say that, she said, withdrawing her hand. We have 3 days left in this arrangement. Then things go back to normal. And if I don't want them to? The question hung between them, charged with possibilities neither had allowed themselves to consider. This isn't real, Emma insisted, stepping back. We constructed it for a specific purpose. Once that purpose is fulfilled, it ends. Is that what you want? What I want doesn't matter. Alexander moved closer, eliminating the space she'd created between them. It matters to me. Emma shook her head, even as her heart raced traitorously in her chest. You don't even know me. Not really. I know you take your coffee black but add cream when you think no one's watching. I know you keep granola bars in your desk drawer for the interns who skip lunch. I know you visit the library on the 4th floor of the downtown branch every Thursday evening. She stared at him, stunned by these intimate details she'd never realized he'd noticed. What I don't know, he continued, is why a woman with your intelligence and education chose to remain an assistant for 3 years when you could have advanced to management. Or why you tense whenever the original Reed Tower development is mentioned. Or why, when you think I'm not looking, you sometimes stare at me with something close to hatred in your eyes. Emma felt the blood drain from her face. All this time, she'd believed her careful mask had never slipped, that her private feelings remained invisible to his cool gaze. Perhaps, he said, voice dropping lower, it's time we were honest with each other. The suggestion terrified her. Honesty meant telling him about her parents' bookstore. About watching everything they'd built disappear beneath the foundations of his empire. About how she'd applied for the position with his company specifically to understand the man who'd destroyed her family's legacy. Honesty meant revealing that her initial hatred had slowly, confusingly transformed into something far more complicated during these weeks of pretense. I can't, she whispered. Alexander studied her face for a long moment, then stepped back. The professional mask settled over his features once more. Go home, Emma, he said, turning back to the window. I'll see you at the contract signing tomorrow. She left without another word, the tension between them unresolved, dangerous in its intensity. As the elevator descended from the executive floor, Emma leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. 3 more days of pretending. 3 days until she could retreat behind professional boundaries again and try to forget how it felt to be the focus of Alexander Reed's undivided attention. 3 days to decide whether some truths were better left unspoken. The Tanner contract signing was scheduled for 2 p.m. in the Reed Enterprises boardroom. By 1:47, Emma had checked the catering, confirmed the champagne was properly chilled, and verified that all 26 pages of the agreement were in order. Only then did she allow herself to slip into the executive washroom to assess her appearance one final time. The woman in the mirror looked polished, professional, wearing a charcoal dress that had cost 2 weeks' salary, hair swept into a neat chignon. Nothing like the disheveled figure who had stumbled from Alexander's hotel room 3 weeks ago. Yet her eyes gave her away, shadows beneath them from a sleepless night, a weariness that makeup couldn't conceal. The door swung open, and Diane Morris, Reed Enterprises General Counsel, entered. There you are. Alexander's looking for you. Emma smoothed an invisible wrinkle from her dress. Is something wrong with the contracts? The contracts are fine. Diane studied her with the shrewd assessment of a woman who'd spent 30 years navigating corporate politics. It's you he seems concerned about. Me. Don't play innocent, Emma. The whole executive floor has noticed the shift between you two. Diane checked her lipstick in the mirror. Though I will say, you've handled it more gracefully than most would. Dating the CEO without leveraging it for advancement, that's either admirable restraint or remarkable strategy. Emma felt heat rise to her cheeks. It's not what you think. It never is, Diane replied with a knowing smile. Just be careful. Alexander Reed doesn't have the best track record with long-term commitments, professional or personal. Left alone again, Emma gripped the edge of the marble counter. The pretense had worked too well. Now, even after they staged their breakup, rumors would follow her through the company, coloring every achievement with whispers of favoritism. Her professional reputation built on competence and discretion would never be quite the same. When she entered the boardroom at precisely 1:55 p.m., Alexander was already there, engaged in conversation with Philip Tanner. He glanced up as she approached, something unreadable flickering across his face. Emma, he said, the familiar use of her first name still strange in a professional setting. Perfect timing. Philip was just asking about you. The older man smiled warmly. I was saying how refreshing it is to see Alexander with someone who challenges him. My late wife was the same, kept me honest for 42 years. Emma managed a smile, acutely aware of Alexander's eyes on her. That's a remarkable partnership. It was indeed. Philip's expression grew reflective. When you find someone who sees you, truly sees you, flaws and all, you hold on tight. The words struck Emma with unexpected force. Had anyone ever truly seen her? Or had she been so careful about maintaining her protective walls that she'd ensured no one could? Even Alexander, for all his recent attentiveness, only saw what she allowed him to see: the efficient assistant, the convincing actress playing a role. If he knew the truth about her connection to the bookstore his company had demolished, would he still look at her with that softening around his eyes? The signing proceeded with ceremonial formality. Pens scratched across paper, hands were shaken, champagne flutes clinked as executives from both companies celebrated the successful conclusion of months of negotiation. Emma stood at the periphery, doing what she'd always done: anticipating needs, ensuring smooth operations, remaining pleasantly invisible. Until Alexander appeared at her side, champagne flute in hand. You should be celebrating too, he said quietly. This merger wouldn't have happened without you. I was just doing my job. We both know that's not true. He handed her the champagne. You went above and beyond, including agreeing to an arrangement that couldn't have been comfortable for you. Emma accepted the glass, careful not to let their fingers touch. The arrangement ends today, as agreed. Alexander's expression stilled. Yes. Our amicable separation will be handled discreetly. I've already mentioned to Patricia Winters that we've decided to take a step back and focus on professional matters. Good. Emma took a sip of champagne, the bubbles bitter on her tongue. That should minimize office gossip. Is that all you're concerned about? The gossip? She met his gaze directly. What else should I be concerned about? Before he could answer, Philip Tanner approached, clapping Alexander on the shoulder. Reed, my boy, I need to steal you away. The manufacturing team has some questions about transition logistics. Alexander hesitated, his eyes still on Emma. We'll finish this conversation later. But Emma knew the conversation, like their fabricated relationship, had reached its natural conclusion. The merger was secured. Eleanor Reed would have access to Tanner's experimental cancer treatments. Business would continue as usual. And Emma would return to being just another employee, nursing the confusing ache that had taken root beneath her ribs. Later, as the executives departed for a celebratory dinner, Emma remained behind to coordinate cleanup. The quiet efficiency of returning the boardroom to order was soothing, a reminder that some things remained constant even as others shifted irreversibly. She was gathering the last of the contract copies when she noticed a folded piece of paper with her name written in Alexander's distinctive handwriting. Inside was a single line. "Meet me at Matthews and Daughter Fine Books. 8 p.m. Emma stared at the note, blood rushing in her ears. There was only one way Alexander could know about the bookstore. He had investigated her background. Had discovered the very connection she'd worked so hard to conceal. The question was why? And more importantly, what did he intend to do with the information? The old storefront no longer existed, of course. In its place rose the sleek glass facade of Reed Tower, 58 stories of architectural triumph that had transformed Vancouver's skyline. Emma stood across the street, watching lights flicker on automatically as evening descended. At street level, where Matthews and Daughter had once displayed leather-bound classics and children's picture books in bay windows, there was now a high-end coffee shop. Nothing remained of the store where she'd grown up, not a plaque, not a photograph, not even a brick salvaged from the demolition. It was here, wasn't it? Emma didn't turn at the sound of Alexander's voice behind her. "How did you find out?" "Corporate security does background checks on all executive-level staff. I requested your full file yesterday." He moved to stand beside her, both of them gazing at the building. "Your parents owned this property from 1985 until the redevelopment in 2003. They didn't just own it," Emma said quietly. "They built their lives around it. That store was everything to them." Alexander was silent for a moment. "Is that why you came to work for me? Because of what happened here?" "Yes." The simple admission hung between them in the cool evening air. Emma had expected to feel relief at finally speaking the truth, but instead found only a hollow ache where her anger had lived for so long. "I wanted to understand," she continued, "how someone could destroy other people's dreams without a second thought. How the man whose decisions shattered my family could sleep at night. And did you understand?" Emma finally turned to look at him. In the fading light, with pedestrians streaming around them and traffic humming past, Alexander Reed looked strangely vulnerable, his customary armor of power and privilege momentarily set aside. "I thought I did," she admitted. "For 3 years, I watched you make ruthless decisions, prioritize profit over people, rebuild this city in your own image without regard for what existed before. It was easy to keep hating you. Until I saw you with your mother at the hospital last year, when you thought no one was watching. Until I noticed you remember the custodians' children's names but forget board members' wives. Until these past weeks, when I realized you're not the monster I needed you to be." Alexander's gaze remained on the building. "I was 26 when this development began. Fresh out of business school, desperate to prove myself to my father. He was the one who acquired these properties, who pushed through the permits despite community opposition. That doesn't absolve you." "No, it doesn't." He turned to face her fully. "Nothing excuses the way these small businesses were treated during the transition. Including your parents' store. The unexpected acknowledgement stunned Emma into silence. After my father died, Alexander continued, I found the correspondence from this block's property owners. Letters begging for more time, for fair compensation, for some acknowledgement of what was being lost. He dismissed them all as emotional appeals without business merit. Emma felt tears threatening, remembering her father's increasingly desperate attempts to save the store. My parents died believing everything they'd built amounted to nothing in the face of progress. I'm sorry, Emma. The words were simple but weighted with genuine regret. If I could go back. You can't, she interrupted. None of us can. They stood in silence, the space between them filled with the ghosts of might-have-beens and the weight of unintended consequences. Why tell me this now? She finally asked. Why not fire me when you discovered who I was? Alexander's expression softened. Because these past weeks have shown me something I've been missing. In trying to build something lasting, I've destroyed too many things that already were. He gestured toward the gleaming tower. I look at this building, and all I see are balance sheets and occupancy rates. You look at it and see your parents' legacy erased. Which of us has the clearer vision? The question wasn't rhetorical. Emma could see he was genuinely struggling, this man who had inherited an empire but perhaps not the wisdom to wield it compassionately. What happens now? She asked. That depends on you. Alexander stepped closer, close enough that she could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the shadow of stubble along his jaw. I can't change the past, Emma. But perhaps we could build something different moving forward. Something different. Something real. His voice dropped lower. These weeks of pretending made me realize how empty my life has been. How I've surrounded myself with people who want something from me, but never someone who simply wants me. Emma shook her head, confused by the direction of his words. I don't understand what you're asking. I'm asking if you could ever look at me and see just Alexander. Not Reed Enterprises. Not the man who tore down your parents' store. Just me. The vulnerability in his question cracked something open inside Emma, a possibility she'd refused to acknowledge even to herself. That beneath her carefully cultivated resentment, another emotion had taken root. Something far more dangerous. I don't know, she answered honestly. There's too much history between us. History doesn't dictate the future, Emma. We do. Alexander reached for her hand, his touch tentative in a way she'd never associated with him. All I'm asking for is a chance to find out. Standing there, with the ghost of her past rising behind them and an uncertain future stretching ahead, Emma made a choice. Not forgiveness that would take time and more than pretty words. Not love that was still too fragile a concept to name. But possibility. The possibility that two people shaped by loss and ambition might find something unexpected in each other. That the story that began with destruction could somehow, improbably, end with creation. She slipped her hand into his. One chance, she said quietly. That's all I can promise. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There was no guarantee that the billionaire and the bookstore owner's daughter would overcome their complicated history. But as Alexander's fingers tightened around hers, Emma felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Small and tentative, but undeniably real. And for tonight, that was enough. 6 months later, Emma stood in the private dining room of Terror, Vancouver's most exclusive restaurant, watching Alexander adjust his tie for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. You're nervous, she observed, smoothing a hand over the midnight blue dress he'd chosen for her birthday dinner, her real birthday dinner, not a staged event for business purposes. Don't be ridiculous. But his fingers betrayed him, fidgeting with his cufflinks. Reed men don't get nervous. Of course not. Emma smiled, still marveling at the changes in their relationship since that evening outside the Reed Tower. It hadn't been easy. After their staged breakup, they'd maintained strict professional boundaries at work while cautiously exploring something genuine in private. Weekend coffee that turned into long walks along the seawall. Quiet dinners where they discovered shared tastes in literature and film. Late-night conversations that gradually stripped away the personas they'd constructed and revealed the people beneath. Emma had learned that Alexander's coldness was a shield built during a childhood with a father who equated emotion with weakness. He'd discovered her passion for community literacy programs and her secret dream of someday reopening a bookstore of her own. Small revelations that accumulated into something neither had anticipated: trust. But tonight, Alexander seemed different. Distracted in a way that made Emma wonder if he regretted the direction they'd taken. "Is everything all right?" she asked as they were seated at a table overlooking the harbor. "You've been on edge all evening." Alexander took a deep breath, then reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small, leather-bound book. "I have something for you." Emma accepted it, running her fingers over the worn cover. "Jane Eyre," she murmured, recognizing the vintage edition. "First printing, 1847. She looked up, stunned. "Alexander, this is incredibly rare. How did you open it?" he said quietly. She did, carefully turning the fragile pages until she reached the front flyleaf. There, in faded ink, was an inscription: "To my beloved daughter Emma, whose imagination knows no bounds. May you always find yourself in the pages of a good book. Love, Dad." Emma's hand flew to her mouth, tears springing to her eyes. This was my father's. From our personal collection. How is this possible?" Alexander leaned forward, his expression gentle. "When Reed Tower was being cleared for demolition, my father had all salvageable items from the properties catalogued and stored. Mostly for tax write-off purposes." His mouth twisted wryly. "After our conversation, I had the warehouse archives searched. There were 17 boxes from Matthews and daughter, mostly inventory that never sold at auction." Emma could barely breathe, her father's handwriting swimming before her tear-filled eyes. "You found our books?" "Not all of them. But several hundred volumes, including your parents' personal collection." "Where are they?" she whispered. "Currently being catalogued by a rare book specialist." "But they're yours, Emma. All of them." She clutched the book to her chest, overwhelmed by the unexpected gift of her family's legacy, preserved when she'd believed it completely erased. "There's more," Alexander said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "The ground floor retail space on the east side of Reed Tower becomes available next month when the tenant's lease expires. If you're interested, I thought perhaps it could become Matthews and daughter again." Emma stared at him, uncomprehending. "You want me to open a bookstore in Reed Tower? I want you to reclaim your family's legacy in the place where it was taken away." Alexander's eyes held a vulnerability she was still getting used to seeing. "The location has been subsidized for the first 3 years, with an option for below-market renewal after that. The business plan projects profitability by year 2, focusing on rare editions and community literacy events." "You've already done a business plan." "I am a businessman," he reminded her with a small smile. one who happens to believe this venture has both economic and emotional merit. Emma shook her head, struggling to process the magnitude of his gesture. Why would you do this? Alexander reached across the table to take her hands in his. Because I've spent my life building things without understanding their true value. Because watching you reconnect with your past has helped me see what really matters. He paused, seeming to gather courage. And because I love you, Emma Matthews. The words, spoken so plainly, hung in the air between them. In 6 months of careful exploration, neither had ventured that particular declaration. You don't have to say anything, he added quickly. I just wanted you to know that the books, the store opportunity, it isn't about guilt or making amends. It's because seeing you happy has become essential to my own happiness. Emma studied the man across from her, trying to reconcile the cold, calculating CEO she'd first encountered with this person who now spoke of happiness and love. Who had painstakingly tracked down her father's books. Who looked at her with hope and fear mingled in his eyes. When I was 18, she said slowly, I promised myself I would never forgive the man who destroyed my parents' dream. I held onto that anger because it was easier than grief. Easier than moving forward. Alexander nodded, accepting her words without defense. But the man I couldn't forgive doesn't exist anymore, Emma continued. Perhaps he never did, outside my own imagination. She squeezed his hands, feeling the strength in them, the possibility they represented. I love you too, Alexander. Not despite our history, but because of how we've both grown through it. Relief and joy transformed his face, erasing the last traces of the masks they'd worn for so long: employer and employee, billionaire and assistant, destroyer and victim. Does this mean you'll accept the store? He asked. Emma smiled, already imagining shelves filled with carefully curated books, reading circles for neighborhood children, her parents' collection displayed in a place of honor. On one condition, she replied. That it's truly mine, no special treatment, no protected status. Just a fair chance to succeed or fail on its own merits. You have my word, Alexander promised, then hesitated. Though I should probably mention that the business plan includes a small cafe component. Managed by a partner of your choosing. Emma raised an eyebrow. Are you suggesting a career change, Mr. Reed? I'm suggesting that building things together might be more rewarding than anything we could accomplish separately. As Emma looked into the eyes of the man who had once represented everything she opposed: wealth without conscience, progress without preservation, power without responsibility, she saw instead a future neither could have imagined when she'd accidentally stumbled into his hotel room. Together, then, she agreed, raising her glass in a toast that sealed not just a business partnership, but a life one. Outside the restaurant windows, Reed Tower stood illuminated against the night sky, no longer a monument to what had been lost, but a beacon for what might yet be found. Life rarely follows the narratives we construct for it. Emma entered Alexander's world seeking understanding of the man who had destroyed her family's legacy, only to discover that both destruction and creation are rarely the work of a single hand or heart. Alexander built an empire of glass and steel without recognizing the human foundations upon which it stood, until a woman with the courage to challenge him revealed what his success had cost others. Their journey reminds us that healing often begins when we stop seeing others as characters in our story and recognize them as protagonists of their own. That forgiveness isn't about forgetting the past, but about refusing to let it dictate the future. That sometimes the very person we've cast as our antagonist may be the one who helps us rebuild what was broken. The most profound changes occur when we open ourselves to unexpected possibilities, when the assistant becomes the truth teller, when the billionaire becomes the listener, when professional masks slip to reveal the vulnerable humans beneath them. Perhaps the greatest lesson is that legacy isn't measured in buildings or balance sheets, but in the lives we touch and the stories we leave behind. Emma and Alexander found their way forward not by erasing their complicated history, but by writing a new chapter together, one where what was destroyed could be rebuilt, different but equally meaningful. Sometimes the wrong turn leads exactly where we need to go. What unexpected path has changed the course of your life? Was there a moment when someone you thought you knew revealed depths you never imagined? Share your story in the comments below. The connections we make through shared experiences are what bring these narratives to life. If Emma and Alexander's journey resonated with you, give this video a thumbs up so more people can discover it. Their story reminds us that behind corporate facades and professional personas beat hearts capable of tremendous growth and change. Subscribe to our channel for more emotional, authentic stories that explore the complexity of human relationships. From unexpected connections to profound second chances, we're dedicated to narratives that challenge, inspire, and move us. Hit that notification bell to join our community of storytellers and story lovers. Every week, we bring you carefully crafted content that explores the depths of human experience, because the most powerful stories aren't about perfect people, but about real ones finding their way through complicated emotions. Tag someone who believes in second chances or who helped you see beyond first impressions. Because sometimes, the greatest stories are the ones we're still writing together.